This is Fred Ricciani of TheSportsCourier, joined by a mixed martial arts pioneer of HOOKnSHOOT, Mr. Jeff Osborne. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, man. How you doing?
Hey, Fred. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Much appreciated to have you on. Certainly a pioneer of the sport, particularly in women's MMA. You gave a shot to a lot of guys people are watching right now in the UFC and World Series of Fighting in Bellator. We'll get to that in a second. Now, I've interviewed a lot of people in MMA, and as I've gotten older, as I've covered MMA more and more, I keep seeing more links to pro wrestling, which of course you got some MMA journalists, you got some fighters that tend to say, oh, MMA has nothing to do with pro wrestling. They can't learn anything from each other. Meanwhile, a pioneer like yourself actually got your start in pro wrestling, right?
Oh, yeah. I've been a long-time pro wrestling fan. I grew up in the Memphis territory. I live in Evansville, Indiana, and you're talking people like Jerry Lawler, a lot of the great bookers of pro wrestling. My mentors were Eddie Gilbert, Dutch Mantell, two of the best storytellers that pro wrestling's ever seen. You know, they could take an average person and turn them into a superstar, and their track records are proven. And I think, a handful of MMA people can gather that, use it, and take advantage of it, but the other 90+% just don't believe in pro wrestling at all.
And are you still a pro wrestling fan?
Yeah, I actually watched Raw last night, and I see, we're all critics. We all think we could do it better, but I still watch it. I still talk to some people in the industry all the time, and
have you ever booked a 3-on-11 handicap match for a main event?
No, but I tell you what, I did like that. I thought it got the point over that the Shield was virtually unbeatable, and they finally gave Daniel Bryan something. So it's still a mess, but it's working, I guess.
Your top two. You have two baby faces, and then just everybody else. They killed poor RVD. He's supposed to be challenging for the world title, so they book him to get destroyed by Randy Orton and then get destroyed by the Shield. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I don't know what the process of good for, but whatever they say is good for business is usually horrible. But yeah, I thought it was a great match. I thought the crowd was incredibly hot last night for that. But there were some things I would have done differently. RVD is definitely one of them.
And you started in pro wrestling. You learned under Eddie Gilbert and our mutual friend Dutch Mantell, who's great, now playing Zeb Coulter, the manager for Jack Swagger and Antonio Cesaro. What made you go, you know what, this pro wrestling thing's cool, but let me try mixed martial arts, especially around the time when MMA wasn't really that big?
I was big into tape trading, and I made a contact in Japan early on, and the early 90s, late 80s, and I traded stuff back and forth, and I would get, these pristine-looking videotapes from this guy, and I came across a press release on one of the tapes of Pancrase and doing demonstrations, and then Pancrase, who I perceive as the first pure MMA promotion, came out in '93 before the UFC. Now, granted, some of the matches are somewhat questionable, and people say, this and that, and it wasn't all a shoot, but for the most part, man, it caught my eye, and I immediately started training with a guy named Scott Sullivan, who lives in my city. He was a big Muay Thai shoot boxing champion in Japan, and Pancrase wanted to grab his, he's a good American boy looking thing, and grabbed him up, put him in a couple fights over there. Then I saw in my local newspaper that you could train in Pancration in Evansville, Indiana. I'm like, what the hell is this? This is crazy. So started training in '93, and UFC came out, and I pretty much walked away from pro wrestling at that point when I found MMA. I don't know if it was a wise idea or not. It's definitely worked for me. So, but using those concepts of pro wrestling, I use them on every show. Anyone who says, I remember being in the Zuffa office right when I first started with them, and they said, well, we want to be like pro boxing. I'm like, why in the hell would anyone ever say that? Why would you not want to be like pro wrestling with a wide array of characters who push themselves? And, it's a shoot. You can't make stars. The stars have to make themselves. That's the biggest difference between pro wrestling and fighting. But I remember them saying they wanted to be like boxing. And I'm like, I can't even stand watching boxing anymore. But
and you won't hear Dana say that now.
Oh yeah. Boxing. There's like one or two or three guys that may sell pay-per-views and tickets, and the rest is just no one's ever going to hear of them. And that's sad, but it's true.
And when you decided to start your own shop, Hook and Shoot, you guys have been around for a long, long, long time. How have you maintained such longevity running a business, which, quite frankly, MMA promoting, any kind of promoting, you're always going to have to invest money to make money. How have you guys stayed in business for so long?
I roll with the market, man, and that's where some of the stuff Shayna Baszler recently said on TV that all these women have stuff handed to them now in MMA when she was back fighting 10 or 12 years ago for crumbs, and that is true. I paid what the market would produce. I didn't overpay. There was a point where we overpaid when we had sponsors and people just throwing money at us prior to 2003 just to be a part of the show. Those days are freaking gone. But, I didn't throw money away. I paid what I could. But in turn, loyalty and integrity goes a long, long way. And, I'm still in business. There's very few shows that aren't good for me, but they're there. It's a rough road if you want to be a promoter. I kind of wish that 80-90% of these people who call themselves promoters would go away today because they have no clue and they just cheapen the product and they have no business promoting. And my number one rule to a fighter, and I hope that fighters listen to this, is do not ever fight for anyone who has not been punched in the face doing the exact same thing you are.
That's some good advice.
Yeah.
And the talent level that you guys had, and still have got some young people coming up. But here's some of the alumni from Hook and Shoot: Frank Mir, Nogueira, Aaron Riley, Chris Lytle, a number of famous women's MMA fighters. Do you feel like it's a little bit... obviously you had to have some type of eye for talent, and you still do. But do you also feel like you got really lucky in a sense that you got such great talent?
I was lucky that we were one of only 3 or 4 promotions in the U.S. back then. I believe that nothing is sacred or special anymore. You had Super Brawl in Hawaii, you had Hook and Shoot in the Midwest, and you had Monty Cox up in the Midwest as well. That was it. That's all you had to fight for. And we turned probably 20, 30 people per show away because at the time you had to work your ass off to be a fighter. You didn't have to go out and color your hair and shave funny things in it and grow a goatee and wear camo trunks and get 5,000 tattoos. That doesn't constitute you being a fighter at all. That's you just being like everyone else. So back then you had to earn it. And we had guys flying themselves in just to be a part of the show because they couldn't fight anywhere. Guys from the UK, guys from Brazil, Japan, all over the place back prior to 2003 in the initial, what I call the second boom of MMA. We had tons of guys coming through here, and it was... the talent level was way up there, and now the talent level, it's like walking into an independent pro wrestling dressing room where everybody's either 140 pounds or 400 pounds, and they all think they can work. And Same thing in MMA. You know, these guys don't train. They're one-dimensional at best, and the whole dressing room is full of 80% of these guys who watched Ultimate Fighter after 2003 or 4 and thought they could do this stuff. That's what's happened. I sound like that old 80-year-old man talking about the old days, but that's true.
So you feel like the talent level, I mean, overall in MMA has kind of been, I don't say devalued, but really diminished after time. Like, I mean, on the surface, though, you look at it, it's like, on one hand, you know, UFC's got that big Fox Sports deal. You know, there's technically more money in the sport, and more people want to get in the sport. But I don't know. I mean, being a UFC fighter, being a high-level fighter, being quote-unquote top 10, is it the same as it used to be? I mean, is the elite still the elite in MMA, or are you talking about more like the guys that are kind of like coming up, and as far as like the lack of any like real new prospects?
Yeah, the elite is still definitely the elite. I mean, you know, the UFC top 10 in each division, I mean, those are the best of the best. I truly, honestly believe that. You're always, but back then, out of every 12 fighters, you'd have a good one, and now it's about out of every 150 fighters, you get somebody worth a crap, and that's not me. I guess it is. That's me saying that people don't work as hard because there's way more shows than there are fighters out there, and these stupid promoters will basically whore out anyone they can get who can agree to fight each other without having any concept of any matchmaking skills and no regard for anyone's physical safety. And that's why I say that rule. You know, I've been taken advantage of as a fighter. I've been lied to, misled, and everything, and I just don't do that. If you've ever encountered anyone in my, I don't even know how long I've been doing this crap, 17, 18, 19 years of promoting that I've screwed over and lied to and misled and conned into fighting someone they shouldn't, just let me know. Come on out and say it. You know, I just don't do that. No one wins from that. And that's why promoters have the reputation they do of, you know, being, you know, the sleazy promoter that they're often labeled. I believe that a high percentage of them are, and they should get the hell out and let the good ones run with what we know.
And sadly, you could kind of apply the same thing to pro wrestling. You know, I mean, right? I mean,
Exactly.
how many independent promoters out there are just, I mean, let's face it, scumbags. I mean, there's a select few that are really good, but more often than not, you hear about the ones that stiff guys that just bail out before a show. I mean, you always hear more about the bad guys than the good guys.
Exactly. I've kind of gone under the radar. I'm not saying I'm the best or the greatest or whatever, but I do know how to treat people who, you know, a mutual respect. But you're right. I'm here in Evansville, Indiana. There's a massive amount of pro wrestling history here. I mean, you look at guys who come out of Memphis like The Undertaker, Stone Cold, Sting, Ultimate Warrior, going back a little bit. They all started here in this territory. And that we had a place, it's the building I run, it's 100 years old, it's the Evansville Veterans Coliseum, and that's where you go for pro wrestling. But the problem is, right now, once one little guy gets his feelings hurt for whatever reason by the matchmaker or booker of that show, he goes and starts his own. So we have 4 independent shows in Evansville, Indiana. None of them can draw more than 70 people, because they're all killing each other off, and some of those guys just have no business running shows.
Yeah, that's a bit overkill.
Yeah.
Man. You mentioned the UFC. You actually were a commentator for them. When and how did that come about, and why did you stop doing that for UFC?
You know, it wasn't my choice, definitely, to ever stop. I really enjoyed it. I think, you know, knowing what I know now, and I was just kind of thrown in there really fast. I'd never done it in that kind of environment before. I always voiced over my own shows, and coincidentally, the demo tape I sent them was Aaron Riley versus Eve Edwards, which was a match of the year, quality match, and it gives you a little bit to talk about. But, you know, I was friends with Joe Silva before the Fertittas took over. I went and auditioned and got the job and all that, and it was fun. You know, looking back, I could have been better, more outgoing and all that stuff. But Joe Rogan said, you know, I would do this job for free. Well, who are you going to want to stand next to your fighters? You want this dude from Indiana, you know, a handful of people know, or you want Joe Rogan, who's an A-list celebrity at the time of the top 10 television show? I'm going to put Joe Rogan in there. Mm. And at the time, I think Joe said, I didn't know I was taking your job. And I have no hard feelings against Joe Rogan. That dude is a class act. He says what's on his mind, and I respect the guy.
Yeah, he does a great job. You mentioned Joe Silva. Joe Silva, what I like about him is that he bases his booking, for the most part, off of pro wrestling. Kind of like what you do. And you haven't made the mistake other promoters and matchmakers make, where it's like, oh, you know, disregard pro wrestling, let's do this ranking thing or whatnot. You know how to treat people with respect. You've utilized your pro wrestling influences. But what pitfalls have you avoided financially that other promoters seem to fall into more often than not?
They're just dumb people. I mean, there's a guy who ran Indiana. You know, you go through all this stuff to get your license, get approved by a government agency and all this stuff. You get background check, fingerprinted, everything. And this guy runs a show with his first show in a town he's never been familiar with, a town he doesn't have anybody in but a gym, you know, that's agreed to help him. So he puts on a pro show and draws about 200 people to a show that probably costs $50,000. So this guy loses his ass, and his solution is, well, we'll just book a bigger show next time. So, just ridiculous. What mentality is that? If I go in a town like that where I don't know and I draw a disappointing show, I'm either going to wait a year and reevaluate or never go back there again. But
maybe he was employed by TNA.
Maybe he was. Maybe he was. It seemed like he brought in a bunch of UFC names that he thought people in Indiana should know. You know, this guy was on season 97 of The Ultimate Fighter, and he didn't make it in the house, but he was on Spike TV back then. And like, no one knows, no one remembers, no one cares. Tell me 5 of the last 10 winners of The Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You were mentioning it before. It's like you see these promoters like UFC veteran, like Baba Ganoush or something. You're like, when did he fight? Oh, he fought in the prelims of UFC on Fuel 15.
Exactly. That means nothing. I get these guys all the time. They'll send me emails. Hey, man, I want to fight for you. I was on Ultimate Fighter. And I said, oh, who are you? He's like, well, I didn't make it in the house, but I fought on Ultimate Fighter. I'm like, okay, tell me how many tickets you're going to sell for me that justifies your $2,500 asking fee and 2 plane tickets and 2 or 3 nights hotel. Go move along, please. I have guys who put asses in seats and earn their way.
And you're also one of the pioneers of women's MMA. I believe you booked the first all-women's MMA card in America in 2002 under the HOOKnSHOOT banner. Why is your name not brought up when people talk about the history of women's MMA? We hear about Scott Coker. We hear about Rousey, of course, because she's current. We hear about Gina Carano, and God bless them. You know, they're doing a great job. But why does nobody bring up Jeff Osborne and HOOKnSHOOT?
I don't know. I mean, I guarantee you I've lost more of my life and money and time in keeping women's MMA alive than anyone else has. You know, not in the last two or 3 years, because I kind of walked away from it because I knew what was going to happen. It's not rocket science. I mean, I sent an email to Dana White. If you get a women's division going, I would love to be a part of it. I would, love to do matchmaking on that. But I never heard back. Me and Dana exchange emails making fun of other promotions from time to time when they do stupid things. But it's been a while. But every prediction I've made every monumental prediction I've made in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years has come true, especially with women's MMA, and you know, it's sad. History just dies in this game. It's not like baseball or football or any kind of traditional sport. It just dies away. I mean, even pro wrestling history stays around forever, but MMA it just goes away.
Yeah, I mean that's quite unfortunate. But do you at least take some pride in the fact that you're seeing how big MMA has grown? I mean, now it's on The Ultimate Fighter. Now it's in the UFC. I mean, it sucks that you're not mentioned more often than not. But do you take some responsibility for the success of women's MMA?
No, I absolutely do. I see people like Baszler, La Rosa, even Jessamine Duke, who's considered new, that they've all passed through here in some way, shape, or form. And it is emotional for me to see that first episode, Ultimate Fighter, and it really meant something. It meant something to me, and it always will. You know, I'm happy to have been a part of it, and I got to travel the world with some of these women, with Bodog and different promotions and stuff like that, and those were some of the greatest times of my life, and I was just glad that some of them were along for the ride back then.
And at the end of the day, you gave them a great opportunity to showcase their stuff, to apply their craft, and look where they are now. So are you kind of like, I don't want to say, I'm not calling you old, but are you kind of like a father, seeing his daughter kind of grow up and move on to big things?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm so proud of some of them. I even somebody like a Julie Kedzie, who's just an awesome ambassador for women's MMA. Smart, outgoing, decent on the mic, and she can also fight. She started here. She looked like just a teenager when she had her first fight. She was smiling in the middle of the fight, smiling afterwards, and so happy she won. It was like it was special. When I saw her and Miesha Tate, that was just an incredible fight.
Great fight. I wish it was on the main card. That was, I think, on Showtime Extreme.
That's what I was saying. Why the hell is that not on the main card? You would have to be a complete idiot to not put that.
I think their reasoning, from what I heard, I think I was listening to Dave Meltzer. I think he was mentioning he heard that they didn't want two women's MMA fights on the main card because they felt like they would either overshadow each other or it was overkill. I'm like, you got Miesha Tate, who could be the next contender. You know what I mean? I don't know.
And then Showtime ended up making a half-hour special out of that.
Yeah.
They aired. Yeah, so that tells you how good. I mean, there's just some matchups you look at where these women are going to throw down with no regard and just leave it all out there. And that was one of those matches. I mean, I don't understand the thought process of some people, but I mean, that's the booking mind of pro wrestling that comes out of me when I see that stuff. So
Invicta right now, they've been running a few shows. They've had a few problems streaming their pay-per-views, and even I think they had a regular the last show with Cyborg and Coonan was a regular pay-per-view. What are your thoughts on them right now? Do you think they're doing a lot more right than wrong? Do you think they're trying to grow a little too fast? I mean, I think it's very ambitious what they're doing, but I don't know how financially wise it is right now.
Yeah, coming from someone who's lost a massive amount of money doing similar things without pay-per-view and such, is very ambitious, and I admire them for doing that and keeping these women busy. I mean, I would imagine that UFC is going to put a hurting on them. I mean, I would think that they're going to take away the top women that Invicta has under contract. I know there was some kind of mutual working agreement or whatever, but the vast majority of those women are probably going to go to UFC at some point, especially if this takes off. I went to one Invicta show. I thought it was just phenomenal. I felt at home. There were 4 or 5 hook and shoot girls fighting on there. Jessica Panay won the belt. She started here. La Rosa fought. Caitlin Young fought. Shayna Baszler fought. I mean, the list just goes on and on of of women I've followed for years, and I definitely have a loyalty to them for going through this with me and fighting for peanuts in the day just to keep this thing alive, and I thank them all for that.
Now, you have tremendous insight. I'm not just saying that because I'm interviewing you right now. I mean, just listening to you, I've heard a lot of great things about your insight and your instincts. And obviously, you've been in business long enough, but for a reason, because you pretty much know what you're doing. Why hasn't Bellator, or more so World Series of Fighting, not approached you to help them out with matchmaking or booking or some type of fighter relations? I mean, I know Bellator's, got Sam Kaplan and those guys, but I mean, I look at World Series of Fighting especially. I mean, that promotion could use a matchmaker that kind of knows what he's doing.
I mean, everybody's an expert now. Everybody knows what they're doing. I've dealt with millionaires, a billionaire, and even the princes of the UAE when we did the Abu Dhabi tournaments over there, and they have more than billions. But the thing that I've learned, and that everyone should know, is that money cannot buy you brains, and it cannot buy you history or knowledge. I mean, that's the biggest problem with this stuff, is you give an idiot $100 million, and he's still a freaking idiot. So, I mean, by not hiring people who know what they're doing, and I watched this happen with Bodog. I mean, they were just hiring people because they had college degrees, not because they had a college degree and they were passionate about MMA, but anyone who had a college degree about anything. It's that sheet of paper I would wipe my ass with if you're not, if you're not passionate about what you do or care about it, then you're just there for a paycheck. I have no interest in you at all.
So do you think that MMA right now, I mean, is it kind of just stuck in status quo? Do you see it going back up? Do you see it going down from here? Is your outlook on MMA the next, I'd say, 3 to 5 years positive, negative, or really about the same as where it's at right now?
I think we're looking at a late 80s, early 90s pro wrestling situation. I mean, for Dana White to say that it's never going to be oversaturated, that's just the dumbest thing you could ever say. I mean, I'm sure Ted Turner and Vince McMahon said that at one point, too, that we just can't get enough pro wrestling, and we sure as hell got enough of it back in the late 80s. And, every week you could turn over and see 50 hours of WWF programming back in the day, and it kind of takes a toll, and you get burned out, and then other people come out and try to do it, and it is definitely on a big downslide right now. I mean, my business is, I think the pinnacle of it, and the one thing I do agree with Dave Meltzer about is there was a big boom, your Elite FC, Strike Force, Bodog, IFL, they all hit at the same time, and it was a fighter's market. You could name your price, and people would pay it to you, and all that just, it goes downhill. Everyone loses their money, and you're a fighter standing on the unemployment lines, and you're expecting to make $60,000 off a fight when you're worth $6,000, and that boom spawned 4 or 5 times the amount of fighters at the current time, and now that all there's left is a bunch of what I call turd shows, and they just need to die off so the good shows can thrive and survive and weed out the people who aren't really fighters. And but my business is way down from 2006, 7, 8. I mean, I had to do no advertising back then, and now it's, you have to beg people to show up or whatever, and it takes 6, 7, 8 local guys on a show just to get the place half full anymore.
So for
definitely on the downslide.
So I was gonna say, for a fighter now, let's turn over to from a fighter's perspective. Do you think it's? I mean, you were mentioning it before. It's a lot easier for somebody to call themselves a UFC veteran now than it would have been, say 5, 6, 10 years ago. But is it easy? Yeah. But is it easier or harder for these guys to make any real money in a sense that they could actually make a full-time living doing MMA?
Oh yeah, you have 10 or 12 times the amount of pro fighters you had just 4 or 5 years ago. Now there's a million UFC veterans. Now, whether or not they've made it past one fight where they go in and lose in a minute and a half and you never hear from him again, he's still a UFC veteran, but what's he going to do for any kind of promoter out there when he thinks he's worth $8,000 and the local promoter can't sell more than $12,000 in tickets? It's just ridiculous. So, I mean, you need to, I get it all the time. When, like, I run a small show. I used to be considered, worldwide. I run a small show, regional show that stays in business now. I don't, venture into the craziness and all that stuff of overpaying people, or I pay what the market can. Is basically what I'm saying. And the biggest mistake Scott Coker ever made was thinking he could go national, and then downhill from there.
Yeah, but
no one will.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said no one will ever compete with the UFC. There is no competitor. Bellator is a close second, but they're always going to be second. It's not going to be a WCW versus WWE type thing where they're competing for ratings and people are turning on 2 TV sets at once to catch there. It's not going to be like that. UFC is king, and they're never going there. Even if they flood the market, oversaturate it, throw 400 hours of TV up every week and make us sick of it, they're never going anywhere.
Yeah. Now, I was also asking too, as a fighter, say I'm a fighter right now. Would you say that while it's easier to get into the UFC, get into Bellator, get into a national promotion these days compared to years ago due to oversaturation, is it harder for guys to make any real money as a fighter? In a sense that, like, 5 years ago, if you got into the UFC, not as many fighters out there, not as many fights, you have a chance to make some real money. Whereas right now, there's 400, 500 fighters on the roster. Maybe you'll get a few fights here and there, but it's a lot harder to move up the ladder depending on what division you're in.
Yeah, you better bust your ass and train like no one else trains, because you have a 2 or 3 fight lifespan with these promotions. And if you have 2 or 3 crappy performances or lose, 3 strikes and you're out like UFC's been doing, you're done. You're never going to make that money again because there's no promotion out there who can afford to pay you a Bellator or UFC payday. You better be the best of the best in the elite, and the rest of the fighters are going to starve. You can't fight twice a year for 6-6 or 8-8 and expect to make a living off of it and retire comfortably.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you also mentioned before about promotions and how they kind of lose their ass making these silly decisions, and how Strikeforce, the biggest mistake they made was going national. Do you think that more promotions should kind of be like Strikeforce in its early days, where they kind of knew their limits, kind of just carved their own niche, not worried about competing? I mean, technically, like, any promotion is going to be your competition, but do you think more promotions should be worried about whether it be pro wrestling, MMA? Should they be more worried about just carving their own niche, doing their own thing, and finding a way to make money their own way, even if it's not going to be at the WWE or UFC level?
That's always been my plan. I don't even care about my competition. I don't necessarily acknowledge it or anything. I go about my own business like it's my own business, and I care nothing about what anyone else does, because ultimately I'm the one who is responsible for running the show and making it what it is. And it's business as usual for me. My only problem is I deal with 2 or 3 or 4 idiots a year who get a promoter's license in Indiana, and they think they're going to be the greatest show of all time, and they go away after 2. Meanwhile, it takes me 2 or 3 shows to kind of recoup and recover from the destruction and crap that these guys leave behind. But ultimately, you're right. I mean, I go about my business like no one else on earth exists, and I'm the biggest fish in the little pond.
And you've been involved in MMA for a very long time, but as we said earlier, you did get your start in pro wrestling. I know you don't have any kind of financial investment in TNA. I know you're more of a fan now, but does it bother you to see them in financial dire straits? I mean, they were doing very well for themselves in the mid 2000s. They were carving their own niche with the X division. Yeah, they had some WCW, WWE veterans, but for the most part, it was a place where you could really see great young talent like Sabin, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe. And nowadays, they're kind of like a poor man's version of WCW 2000. I mean, how much does it bother you to see TNA kind of on its last legs when they really had a chance to stay in business for a long time and be profitable?
Yeah, it's one of those shows where I just kind of turn over and see what's going on, and if I lose interest, I'd go away. It's how many times can you shoot yourself in the foot and screw things up when you have the world sitting in your dressing room, but you go back to the old world and you bury the best guys you have. Why would you do that? I mean, you're sitting on so much talent, and now I look at the show and I look at those guys as like, man, sorry, you're just stuck in purgatory, and I don't even view them the same way as I did. I feel bad for like Styles and Samoa Joe, who I thought, like, man, these guys could go to Vince and be the greatest new thing since sliced bread, and they stayed there, got stuck for whatever reason, and I just don't even view them as the same anymore. I just view them as, like I said, stuck in purgatory, and that it's just not special anymore when it could have been.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Do you think the state of wrestling right now, positive swing, negative swing, is it going to stay where it's at right now? I mean, we were talking off the air before about how they barely have any baby faces. I mean, it's Daniel Bryan, it's CM Punk, John Cena when he gets back. That's really about it. But John Cena is still kind of like the main top draw outside of bringing in The Rock every now and then. I mean, do you think WWE is in good shape right now or headed towards a down period?
I mean, they're always one day away from being in good shape. They're in good shape, but if they get in bad shape, they can just cut loose whoever they want and manipulate, shows and rosters however they want. And I am so hungry to see Cena just return as a heel. Just give it to us, good God. And they're always going to survive and always be in good shape. There's nothing that's ever going to knock them down or anything by any means. But, are there a few guys I like to see used differently? Absolutely. Why do you keep trying to bury Daniel Bryan, or, you have so much momentum going with Punk or Bryan and you just take a dump on it? I don't understand the thought process there. But
yeah, it's not best for business, as they say.
Yeah. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, we're all critics, and I personally think it sucks, but I still watch it every week, so my opinion does not matter.
Yeah, same here.
I will say I've gone to more live WWE events in the last 3 years than I have in the last 10 or 12. I mean, it's mostly because my 8-year-old daughter takes an interest in it, and she has fun, enjoys herself, and is entertained.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun show. I just wish they would do things better and more logical. But I guess they do things logically by their standards, so.
Yeah, whatever standards those are.
And Jeff, well, I really appreciate the time, man. We'll get you out of here on this. What's one piece of advice you could give to anybody, not really just getting into promoting, but having a long career in combat sports, whether it be a promoter, whether it be a fighter?
Yeah, it's a loyalty, integrity issue all the way around. I mean, I am always going to be eternally loyal to those who were with me and were open and honest with me. And I do the same to them. Fighters, you better, if you think you're going to make a living in this game, you need to reevaluate or train your ass off like you've never thought of before. And promoters, 80% of you should go back to working your day jobs and leave the rest of us alone. And again, my theory of how can you fight for someone who's never done what you have done, or gone through the sacrifices that you've gone through. And that's, not only do I so-called promote MMA, I was also a fighter. I still actively train 5 days a week. I'm 44 years old. I'm in probably the second or third best shape of my life because I still do this stuff. I never stopped.
That's awesome, man. And where can fans find you and Hook and Shoot online?
I think all we have is a Facebook page now. It's just HOOKnSHOOT. It's the letter N in between Hook and Shoot, and you can look us up on Facebook.
Great. Well, we'll definitely provide that link. Next time, you got to get a Twitter, man. Come on, everybody's on Twitter. We got to get you trending one day. So you
I may be the last human being on Earth who hasn't done Twitter. So.
Oh, come on. You don't want to tweet Michael Cole during Raw?
I might do that.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I really appreciate the time.